You know what nobody tells you about buying a house? It's not about the white picket fence or the backyard barbecues. It's about the moment you sign those papers and suddenly everyone treats you differently. Your parents are proud. Your friends ask for advice. Strangers at parties nod with approval when you mention you're a homeowner. You've made it. You're an adult now. You're successful. Except here's the thing. That feeling, that rush of validation, that sense of arrival, it might be the most expensive emotion you'll ever experience. Because in 2025, owning a home in America has become less about building wealth and more about performing success. And the math behind it is absolutely brutal. Before we dive into why 75% of American households can't actually afford the median-priced home right now, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. What I'm about to show you is information that real estate agents don't want you thinking about too hard, and financial advisors rarely discuss until it's too late. Hi, I'm Matt. On this channel, I break down personal finance and money strategies that actually work for real people, not trust fund kids or tech bros making $300,000 a year. If you're tired of being told that homeownership is always the answer, stick around. Now, let's talk about the uncomfortable truth. The median existing home in America costs $415,200 as of late 2025. That's up from $329,000 just 5 years ago. Meanwhile, the median household income is around $84,000. Do the math on that. A median-priced home now costs 5 times the median household income. Historically, that ratio was around 3 to 3.5. That meant if you made $50,000 a year, you could reasonably afford a $150,000 to $175,000 home. The numbers worked. Your monthly payment wouldn't crush you. You could save for retirement, handle emergencies, maybe even take a vacation once in a while. But at a 5-to-1 ratio, the game has fundamentally changed. If you're earning $84,000, you're supposedly in the market for a $420,000 home. And with mortgage rates sitting around 6.21%, your monthly payment on that median-priced home hits about $2,570. Add property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and you're easily over $3,000 a month. That's $36,000 per year just for housing. On an $84,000 income, that's 43% of your gross pay, before taxes. The traditional affordability threshold says you shouldn't spend more than 28 to 30% of your income on housing. We're talking about people spending 40 to 50% of their income just to own a median-priced home. That's not sustainable. That's not wealth building. That's financial stress dressed up as the American dream. And yet people keep buying. Why? Because owning a house feels like success, even when the numbers scream that it's not. Let's talk about what's really happening psychologically when you buy a house. Right after you close, you post the photo on social media, you holding the keys. The likes pour in. Congratulations, so happy for you, you did it. That dopamine hit is real and powerful because for most of your life, you've been told that home ownership equals adulthood. Your parents drilled it in. Every piece of mainstream financial advice pushes you toward it. Rent is throwing money away, they say. Build equity, they say. So when you finally buy, you're not just purchasing a structure, you're purchasing validation. You're purchasing status. You're purchasing proof that you've figured life out. But here's what nobody mentions. That feeling of success is completely divorced from whether buying was actually a good financial decision for you. The psychology of ownership and the economics of ownership are two entirely different things. And in 2025, they've never been further apart. When you tell someone you bought a house, they don't ask if your debt-to-income ratio is sustainable. They don't ask about opportunity cost or stress testing your budget. They say, congratulations, that's amazing. Because culturally, we've decided home ownership is inherently good. It's a milestone, and once you hit it, you've earned respect that renters simply don't get. The social pressure is massive and warps decision-making in genuinely dangerous ways. In 2025, the home ownership rate in America sits at 65.3%. That sounds decent until you break it down by age. For people under 35, the rate is just 37.5%, the lowest in years. And it's not because young people don't want to own homes. Surveys show home ownership remains a top life goal. The problem is affordability has completely collapsed. A household earning $75,000, which includes teachers, nurses, tradespeople, and a huge chunk of middle-class America, now can only afford 21% of homes on the market. Just 5 years ago, in 2019, that same household could afford 49% of available listings. In half a decade, housing affordability for middle-income earners was cut in half. But here's the psychological trap. Even knowing these numbers, people still feel like failures if they're not homeowners by a certain age. They feel behind. They feel less successful than their peers who bought in. And that emotional weight drives decisions that don't make financial sense. So they stretch. They buy a house they can barely afford. They sacrifice retirement contributions to cover the down payment. They take on a mortgage that consumes 45% of their income. And when it all works out, when they don't lose their job or face a major expense, they point to their home as proof they made the right call. But what if it doesn't work out?
Let's get into the actual numbers, because this is where the illusion starts to crack. When you buy a house with a mortgage, here's what really happens. You purchase that median-priced home at $415,200 with 10% down, financing $373,680 at 6.21% over 30 years. Your monthly payment hits $2,280 for principal and interest. Add property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, you're at $3,200 per month. That's $38,400 per year. Advocates say you're building equity, but in year one, you pay $27,400 total. Of that, $22,800 goes to interest. Only $4,600 goes to principal. You spent $27,400 to gain $4,600 in equity you can't access without selling or borrowing. Meanwhile, that $41,520 down payment invested in stocks at 10% annual return would have made $4,152 in year one alone, and it's liquid. This is the financial mirage. Homeownership feels like wealth building because you see the Zillow value climb, but that number is theoretical until you sell, and in the meantime, you're locked into a massive monthly expense that limits your financial flexibility everywhere else. Here's what happened during the pandemic boom. From 2020 to 2024, home prices surged 60%. People who bought in 2019 saw their homes worth $100,000 or $200,000 more on paper, but they locked in mortgage rates between 2.5% and 4%. Now rates are over 6%. Moving means trading a 3% mortgage for 6.21%. On a $400,000 loan, that's $764 more per month, $9,168 per year. Their equity is trapped because relocating would financially destroy them. Experts call this the golden handcuffs. That's not freedom, that's being stuck. And there's maintenance. Budget 1 to 2% of your home's value annually. On a $415,200 home, that's $4,152 to $8,304 per year. When the roof or HVAC fails, you can't call the landlord, you're paying. Now consider opportunity cost. That $41,520 down payment could have been invested. The S&P delivered 26.3% in 2023, 25% in 2024, and 14.9% through late 2025. If you invested that money at the start of 2023, you'd have nearly $70,000 now. That's $28,480 in gains, and it's liquid. But you put it into a house. Now it's tied up in an illiquid asset appreciating maybe 4% annually. Real estate averages 4%, stocks average 10%. Over 30 years, $41,520 at 4% becomes $135,000. At 10%, it becomes over $725,000. Yet we're programmed to see the house as the safer investment because you can live in it. But feelings and financial reality are not the same thing. Alright, we're at the halfway point of this video, and if you're still watching, you're probably in one of two camps. Either you already own a home and you're feeling defensive, or you're thinking about buying and you're starting to panic. Let me be clear. I'm not saying homeownership is always bad. I'm saying the math in 2025 is fundamentally broken for most people, and pretending otherwise does more harm than good. Let's look at the current state of the housing market because the numbers are absolutely wild. As of late 2025, about 75% of American households cannot afford a median-priced new home at $459,826. That's not a typo. 3 out of 4 households are priced out. To afford that home with a 6.5% mortgage rate, you'd need an annual income of at least $141,366. The median household income in America is $84,000. That means the median household is about $57,000 short of what they'd need to buy the median home. The disconnect is insane. And it's not just new construction. For existing homes at $415,200, you'd need an income around $126,700 to comfortably afford it. Only 25% of American households meet that threshold. Everyone else is either stretching their budget to the breaking point or getting shut out entirely. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Home ownership rates have been declining, especially among younger people. But here's the thing. The people who are buying homes right now, the ones who can still afford it, they're older and wealthier than ever before. The median age of a home buyer in 2025 hit a record 59 years old. The typical first-time buyer is now 40 years old, up from 33 just 5 years ago. Think about what that means. Homeownership is becoming a privilege of middle age and higher income, not a rite of passage for young adults starting out. And it's creating a massive generational divide. Boomers who bought homes in the 1980s and 1990s got in when median home prices were 3 to 4 times median income. They locked in low prices, benefited from decades of appreciation, and now sit on massive amounts of home equity. Gen X got in during the early 2000s, took a hit during the 2008 crash, but mostly recovered. Millennials and Gen Z are getting absolutely crushed. They're entering the market when home prices are 5 times median income, when mortgage rates are over 6%, and a 10% down payment requires saving for years. Meanwhile, institutional investors are gobbling up properties. In the first half of 2025, institutional investors made up 30% of single-family home purchases. That's a record high. They're buying homes as rental properties, which reduces inventory for individual buyers and drives prices even higher. So you've got fewer homes available, prices at all-time highs, mortgage rates elevated, and deep-pocketed investors competing against regular people trying to buy their first home. It's a disaster for affordability. But let's bring this back to the psychological piece, because this is where it gets really interesting. Despite all these barriers, surveys show that most people still view owning a home as a primary lifetime goal. The aspiration hasn't died. People want to own. They believe they should own. And that creates this massive pool of pent-up demand pressing against a market that's fundamentally unaffordable. What happens when you have millions of people desperate to buy but unable to afford it? They make compromises. They buy smaller homes than they wanted. They move farther from city centers to find cheaper prices. They take on riskier mortgages or stretch their budgets thinner than they should. And when something goes wrong, a job loss, a medical bill, a market downturn, they're in serious trouble. Here's a sobering stat. The homeowner vacancy rate, which measures the percentage of homes sitting empty because owners can't sell them, has ticked up to 1.2% in late 2025. That might sound small, but it's higher than the 0.9% we saw just a year ago. It suggests that more people are struggling to offload properties, potentially because they're underwater on their mortgages or can't find buyers willing to pay what they owe. And let's talk about what happens when the housing market corrects, because it will. It always does. Some experts are already warning that we could see a sustained housing downturn as the market buckles under the weight of near 7% mortgage rates earlier in the year. Home prices in some markets have already started declining. Austin, Texas saw a 6% median price drop, with inventory up 69% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Florida markets like Cape Coral saw price declines of nearly 11% year over year. These aren't nationwide crashes, but they're warning signs. When you buy at the peak of a market and prices correct even 10%, you're underwater. You owe more than the house is worth. And if you need to sell, you're taking a loss. That's not wealth building. That's financial destruction dressed up as homeownership. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a system where owning a home feels like success because we've been culturally conditioned to believe it is, even when the financial reality says otherwise.
Now, I'm not here to tell you that buying a house is always a mistake. There are absolutely scenarios where home ownership makes sense, but they're more specific and more limited than most people realize. Let's talk about when buying a house actually works as a financial decision, not just an emotional one. First, you need stability. If you're planning to stay in the same place for at least 7 to 10 years, homeownership starts to make more sense. Why? Because the transaction costs of buying and selling are massive. Realtor fees, closing costs, moving expenses, it all adds up to about 8% to 10% of the home's value. So if you buy a $400,000 home and sell it 2 years later, you're losing $32,000 to $40,000 in transaction costs alone. The property would need to appreciate significantly just for you to break even. But if you stay for a decade, those costs get amortized over time, and appreciation has a chance to work in your favor. Second, you need an emergency fund. And I'm not talking about $1,000. I'm talking about 3 to 6 months of expenses saved separately from your down payment. If you're draining every dollar you have to buy a house, you're one emergency away from financial disaster. When the water heater breaks or the roof needs replacing, you need cash to handle it. If you don't have it, you're going into debt, which defeats the entire purpose of building wealth through homeownership. Third, your housing payment needs to be reasonable relative to your income. I'm talking 28% or less of your gross income, not 40% or 50%. If you're making $100,000 a year, your total housing costs, including mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance, should be under $28,000 annually, or about $2,333 per month. If you're pushing $4,000 or $5,000 a month, you're setting yourself up for stress and financial fragility. Fourth, you need to be contributing to retirement. If you're skipping your 401k contributions to afford a house, you're making a massive mistake. Home ownership should never come at the expense of retirement savings. The equity in your home won't pay your bills when you're 70 years old, unless you're willing to sell and downsize. And even then, it's a one-time liquidation. Retirement accounts grow tax-deferred and provide income through withdrawals. They're designed for long-term wealth. Your house is designed for shelter. Fifth, mortgage rates matter a lot. At 3% interest, a $300,000 loan costs you about $1,265 a month. At 6.21%, that same loan costs $1,835 a month. That's $570 more every month, or $6,840 per year, just because of the rate difference. Over 30 years, you're paying an extra $205,000 in interest. So if you're buying when rates are elevated, you're locking yourself into significantly higher costs for decades. Some people will say you can always refinance when rates drop. Maybe, but refinancing costs money, and there's no guarantee rates will drop to levels that make it worthwhile. If you locked in at 6.21% and rates only drop to 5.5%, the savings might not justify the refinancing fees. Now, let's talk about the scenarios where homeownership genuinely builds wealth. If you bought a home in a growing market, put down 20%, locked in a low interest rate, stayed for 10 plus years, and saw your property appreciate 4% annually while your income also grew, you probably did well. Your equity grew, your mortgage payment stayed fixed while rents around you increased, and when you eventually sell, you walk away with a significant profit. But notice all the conditions in that scenario. Growing market, low interest rate, long timeline, income growth. If any one of those factors doesn't play out, the math changes dramatically. And in 2025, most of those conditions don't exist for most buyers. Here's what people also overlook. Owning a house ties up capital that could be working harder elsewhere. If you put $50,000 into a down payment, that's $50,000 that's not in the stock market. Over 30 years, assuming a 10% average return, that $50,000 could have grown to over $872,000. Even accounting for the 4% appreciation on your home, the stock market wins by a landslide. Yes, you need somewhere to live, and yes, renting costs money too, but renting gives you flexibility, it gives you liquidity, and if you're disciplined about investing the difference between renting and owning, you can come out ahead financially. This isn't theory, this is math, and the math doesn't care about your feelings or your parents' advice or what society says you should do. So here's where we land. Owning a house feels like success because we've built an entire cultural narrative around it. We've decided as a society that homeownership equals stability, maturity, and financial responsibility. And for generations, that narrative held true. But in 2025, the economics have shifted so dramatically that the narrative no longer matches reality. When a median-priced home costs 5 times the median household income, when mortgage rates sit above 6%, when 75% of American households can't afford the median home, we're not talking about a functional housing market. We're talking about a system that's fundamentally broken for most people. And yet the pressure to buy persists because the psychological weight of homeownership is so deeply embedded in American culture. You're not just buying shelter, you're buying validation, you're buying status, you're buying proof that you've made it. But what if making it doesn't require owning a home? What if financial success looks like having $100,000 invested in a diversified portfolio, 0 consumer debt, a fully funded emergency fund, and the freedom to take a job opportunity in another city without worrying about selling a house? That's wealth, that's security, and you don't need a mortgage to get there. The housing market isn't going to fix itself anytime soon. Inventory is still tight, prices are still elevated, mortgage rates aren't dropping back to 3% unless there's another economic crisis, and even if they do drop, it'll spark another wave of buying that drives prices right back up. The affordability crisis isn't a temporary problem, it's a structural shift that's redefining who gets to own homes in America. And if you're not in the top 25% of earners, you're increasingly on the outside looking in. Does that mean you should never buy a house? No, it means you should buy a house when the numbers actually make sense, not when you feel like you're supposed to. It means you should run the math on renting versus buying and be brutally honest about what you can afford. It means you should prioritize financial stability over social validation. Because here's the truth, owning a house doesn't make you successful. Being financially secure, having options, and building wealth that you can actually access, that's what success looks like. And sometimes the smartest financial decision is to keep renting, keep investing, and let everyone else chase the dream that's become a financial nightmare for millions of Americans. So ask yourself this, are you buying a house because the numbers make sense? Or are you buying because it feels like what you're supposed to do? Because one of those is a financial decision, and the other is an emotional one that might cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Think about it.